Hi, my name's Zoe. I was flying first class, just once, just this once, and when I couldn't breathe, my sister looked right at the flight attendant and said, "She's faking it, move her to economy." They did. No one asked if I was okay. Not then. Not when I funded her company. Not when they left my name off Dad's funeral program. Not when Mom said, "Let it go, Zoe, she's the one who makes us proud." But how many times can you be erased before you start to disappear? Even from yourself. And what happens when the one they wrote out finally learns how to write herself back in? I sat alone in the last row, my knees pressed to the seat ahead, watching the city disappear beneath the clouds, just like my voice had disappeared years ago. The cabin smelled like old coffee and fabric softener. My body was angled slightly to the side, not out of pain anymore, but out of something more difficult to name: shame. I'd taken the aisle seat. There was no one next to me, but I still kept to my side like I was a guest overstaying her welcome in her own skin. First class was only a few rows away, but it might as well have been a different world. I could still hear Vera's voice, crisp and cold, like a slap in winter. "She's faking it. She always does this for attention. She's taking up space. Just move her to economy." Not a single passenger stood up for me. Not one glance of protest. Not even the attendant. The woman's eyes had flickered with something, maybe sympathy, maybe doubt. But all I got was a soft, "Would you prefer a more private area, ma'am?" I said nothing. I didn't trust my voice. I simply nodded, clutching my handbag like it might keep me from falling apart. Now, the plane hummed its usual lullaby, but my ears rang with a different frequency. Humiliation. The kind that clings. The kind that lives in your throat long after the moment has passed. I reached for my phone, half hoping for a message that would anchor me. There it was. "Mom." A text. "Mom, did Vera say anything on the flight that might go public? Let me know ASAP. Don't want her name dragged." That was it. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "I heard you weren't feeling well." Just concern for Vera's image. I stared at the screen so long it dimmed. That little flicker of light vanished into black, just like any hope I still had, that someone in my family might look at me as something more than an inconvenience. The air felt thinner now, despite the pressurization. I leaned back, trying to calm the storm inside me. The man across the aisle glanced over and then quickly looked away, like he'd witnessed something private, like grief. And then came the smile. That stupid, practiced, polite smile. The same one I used when Vera, years ago, sat on a talk show couch and chuckled. "Oh, Zoe? She's sweet, but not very ambitious. I guess every family has that one sibling." The audience laughed. She laughed. I stood backstage, holding a travel mug of lemon tea for her, smiling like it didn't hurt. I wasn't even supposed to be on this flight. The only reason I booked first class was because the economy section was sold out by the time my ticket was reimbursed from a last-minute consulting gig. Vera and I hadn't spoken directly in months. The fact that she was on the same plane, in the same row, pure coincidence. Or maybe fate, if fate had a nasty sense of humor. I took a deep breath. The kind you learn in therapy, slow in through the nose, hold, release through the mouth. My chest still ached, but it wasn't medical anymore. It was metaphorical. Somewhere between North Carolina and California, I realized I wasn't sick. I was suffocating, under decades of being tolerated instead of loved, of being useful instead of valued. The curtain separating the cabins fluttered as someone passed through. My eyes reflexively darted up. It wasn't her. Of course it wasn't. Vera wouldn't come back here. Not for me. Not for anyone she couldn't use. I closed my eyes. The first time Vera took something that was mine, I was 9. A school project I'd worked on for days. A diorama of the solar system made out of papier-mâché. She took it to her class because, she said, "Mine didn't turn out right, and yours looks better anyway. It's just cardboard." I got a gold star taped to the fridge. She got extra credit and her teacher's praise. My parents told me, "That's what sisters do." They share. No one ever told Vera that. When the attendant returned and offered water, I declined. She lingered for a second and then leaned down slightly. "I'm sorry about earlier," she whispered. "That shouldn't have happened." I met her eyes. They were kind. Or at least tired in the same way mine were. "Thank you," I said, voice low but steady. When she left, I turned my phone over again and began typing. Not to Mom, not to Vera, to myself. A note. Maybe this time I won't just let it go. I didn't know what that meant yet, but something in me stirred. Not a scream, not even a whisper, just the quiet, undeniable pull of a woman who was done shrinking. The scent of warm cookies always brings me back to that house on Willow Creek, where everything was quiet until it wasn't. I still remember the way sugar hung in the air, like a false sense of peace. That day, at the funeral reception, the plates were stacked high, and the compliments flew toward Vera like bees to honey. And I stood there, same as always, by the folding table, next to the oatmeal raisin, watching history repeat itself. I don't think anyone even noticed I was there. That had become a pattern. A thread so consistent it might as well have been woven into the fabric of my name. The day Vera graduated high school, I was 16. I'd been told to stay home and help Mom with the setup. That's how it was phrased. Help. Not instructed, not commanded, just gently guilted. "Vera's worked so hard, sweetie. Be a good girl," Mom said as she handed me the list. Napkins, lemonade, plastic forks, balloons. I missed the ceremony, missed the applause, missed watching her walk across the stage in that emerald robe our grandmother helped tailor. I spent the morning setting up folding chairs, chasing paper plates in the wind, and heating trays of finger sandwiches. I didn't complain. I didn't ask why. I never asked why. Later that afternoon, a photographer came for the local paper. Dad had arranged it. Something about recognizing young female excellence in Mecklenburg County. I wiped my hands on my apron and stood beside the hedges, behind the chairs, thinking maybe someone would motion me over. They never did. The next day, the newspaper showed up on our doorstep. A glossy photo of my family smiling in our backyard. Mom, Dad, Vera in the middle, diploma in hand, smile stretching all the way to her ears. I was not in the photo. When I asked, Mom said, "Oh, honey, you were probably still in the kitchen. Besides, it's Vera's moment." That sentence stuck. Not because it hurt, but because it was said so effortlessly. As if the omission of my existence was practical. Efficient even. At the funeral last month, things hadn't changed. Vera delivered the eulogy. Poised, polished, dressed like a senator's wife. She stood at the lectern with perfect posture and began, "Our father loved strong women. He raised one." The congregation chuckled softly. A nodding moment. I was seated in the third row, next to Aunt Carol, and behind a ficus. When the funeral programs were passed out, my name wasn't in them. Vera had done the draft. I recognized the format. Centered text, serif font, scripted title. It was her style. A distant cousin, someone I hadn't seen since childhood, leaned over and whispered, "Are you part of the staff?" I smiled. That same damn smile I'd worn backstage at Vera's talk show, the one I couldn't seem to retire. A muscle memory carved from years of being overlooked. Later, I found myself in the women's restroom, not crying hard, just quietly in a stall. I dabbed my eyes with the rough brown paper towels from the dispenser. Nobody came in. Or if they did, they didn't notice the locked door and the shoes beneath it. Grief does strange things. It pulls the curtain back on your history, forces you to stare at the places where love was supposed to be, but wasn't. And you don't know what's worse, missing the love or finally admitting it was never there. I think that's when I started to realize I was grieving more than just Dad. At the reception afterward, the house was filled with people balancing plastic plates and exchanging phrases like, "He was a good man," and "We'll miss him dearly." No one said anything to me. They spoke around me, over me, but never directly. I was an extra in my own life. I stood near the dessert table again, same spot as during Vera's graduation. Mom floated between conversations like a hostess at a gala, and Vera held court in the living room. A child, maybe 7 or 8, approached her with a crayon drawing. "You're so cool," the little girl said. Vera knelt down, smiled sweetly, and said, "Thank you, sweetheart. I try." It wasn't the girl's words that cracked something in me. It was Vera's reaction. How she soaked it in, how natural it looked, how none of it surprised her. She was used to it. She expected it. And in that moment, I finally admitted something to myself. I didn't want to be invisible anymore. Not in pictures, not in programs, not in life. I didn't want to spend another year, another event, another day watching people congratulate Vera for things I quietly helped build, support, or fix behind the scenes. I don't want to be cut out again, I thought. Not from life, not from justice. The house buzzed with voices, but inside me there was only stillness, and for the first time, that stillness didn't feel like silence. It felt like a storm preparing to speak. That night, I didn't cry. I opened a new folder, and for the first time in years, I saved something under my own name. I didn't sleep well. My body lay still, but my mind looped through every detail. Vera's smirk at the launch, the applause that followed, the hollow echo in my chest as my name was skipped over, like it never belonged in the conversation. When I did drift off, it wasn't restful. I dreamed I was standing in a crowd, screaming, but no one could hear me, like I was behind a pane of glass, banging my fists while they toasted my erasure. By morning, the knot in my throat hadn't loosened. I got dressed slowly, pulled my hair into a low twist, and made a pot of coffee I barely touched. The event had been held at the Westin Uptown, one of those hotels that smells like money and filtered air. It was where they launched the new product line, the one Vera and I had brainstormed in my living room over Chinese takeout and too much caffeine. Now she'd taken our ideas and turned them into her crown. And me? I was in the background again. I arrived early, hoping to avoid eye contact with anyone who might recognize me. The lobby was already buzzing with stylists, influencers, local business owners. My name tag read Consultant Brand Insights. Just a line under her name. A technicality. They had a red carpet, flashbulbs, big banners with Vera's face airbrushed to perfection. Her makeup flawless, her posture effortless. The kind of image PR firms dream of and little girls are told to grow into. And I stood behind a potted plant near the buffet, pretending to check email. The real burn came halfway through the presentation. Vera stood on stage, bathed in flattering light. Her voice rang clear over the sound system. "This journey has been mine, but I never walked it alone. I owe so much to a village of strong, inspiring people." My stomach fluttered. She was building to something. I straightened up slightly. Maybe she would say it. Maybe this was the moment. But the next slide flashed across the giant screen behind her. Founders and key contributors. Faces appeared, smiling, names in elegant fonts. Not mine, not even close. I blinked. A beat passed, then another. My ears rang. From the row in front of me, a man turned, confused. "Didn't you help her get started?" I forced a smile and shrugged. "Just a little." He nodded, half satisfied, and turned back to the stage. The applause began again, and I clapped too, just enough to blend in. That's when I felt it. This deep, guttural certainty. They never planned to give me credit. Not from the beginning. I wasn't forgotten. I was deleted. The rest of the day moved in a blur. I left the hotel without saying goodbye. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I drove around the city, past the pharmacy where I used to pick up Dad's prescriptions, past the Vietnamese place we all used to meet at before life got complicated. Everything familiar, now dusted in something sour. That evening, I walked into my apartment, dropped my bag by the door, and went straight for the filing cabinet. My hands didn't shake. They moved with the calm precision of someone who's done this before. But for everyone else, inside was a folder marked with a date, 2017. The year I registered the LLC with Vera. The year I paid the first design consultant. The year I wrote the pitch email I never sent. I pulled it all out: receipts, prototypes, ingredient lists, brainstorm notes, my handwritten tagline ideas, my handwriting, my pen strokes, my work. Then I saw it. An email from me to Vera, time-stamped 1:17 a.m., subject line, working name ideas. Her reply came 2 days later. Thanks, Zoe. Already ran a few of those past the team. Let's see which ones stick. She filed the trademark a week later. Alone. I felt something sharp behind my ribs. It wasn't rage. Rage burns. This was colder. A sinking weight of knowing. The next morning, we were expected to have a family dinner to celebrate the launch. It was Mom's idea. Just close ones, she said. Vera's board is flying out tomorrow, and they want to keep it intimate tonight. I almost didn't go, but I showed up. Because old habits die hard. Because somewhere deep down, the little girl with the paper towel in her hand and lemonade on her jeans still hoped to be seen. We sat around the long table at Mom's. I brought a bottle of wine, something semi-expensive but safe. Vera was already there, chatting with 2 men from her team and Aunt Carol, who was always conveniently present for praise. Dinner was a roast with garlic potatoes, the kind Mom made when she wanted everyone to behave. It was too warm in the dining room, the air thick with polite tension and too many smiling teeth. Halfway through the meal, Mom raised her glass. To Vera, she said, voice bright, practiced. Our family's shining light. Your father would be proud. Everyone lifted their drinks. I did too. What else was there to do? Vera, grinning, leaned back in her chair and said, Imagine if Zoe ran this company. Boom! We'd all be bankrupt. Laughter erupted. Forks clinked against plates. Someone said, Oh, stop, but kept laughing anyway. I laughed too, but quietly. It was the kind of laugh that sounds right in the room, but rings hollow in your ears after. That night, when I got home, I poured myself a small glass of wine, but didn't drink it. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and created a folder. Not one named after Vera. Not Ashe. Just my name, Zoe Creed. Inside, I dropped a scanned copy of the original formula. Then, I added the pitch deck outline. And for the first time in a very long time, I allowed myself to plan for a future that didn't revolve around her shadow. The folder sat open on my desktop, the files organized neatly, finally, under the right name. Mine. I stared at the screen a moment longer before pushing the chair back slowly. It was after 11 p.m., but I didn't feel tired. Instead, I felt alert. Like the air had shifted, like something in me had reset. The next morning, I skipped coffee. My stomach wasn't interested in breakfast. I pulled on jeans, a dark sweater, and my go-to flats. Nothing fancy, but enough to look like I had somewhere to be, and I did. I'd booked a meeting with a lawyer 2 days earlier using a friend's referral. She knew a guy, discreet, old school, not one of those billboard lawyers with catchy rhymes. That's exactly what I needed, not fireworks, not drama. Just someone who would listen carefully and document even more carefully. His office was in a brick building on the east side of town, tucked between a bakery and a dentist. A sign simply read, E. Lang and Asak. I walked in, heart steady but chest tight. Not from fear, but from the weight of finally doing something I should have done years ago. He met me with a firm handshake, no unnecessary pleasantries. Just one question after I sat down. What are we protecting? I slid a thumb drive across the desk. My truth, I said, and my work. He raised an eyebrow. Understood. We didn't speak in full sentences for a while. He opened the files, browsed through folders, clicked through email chains, timestamps, drafts. I watched him nod occasionally, tap a few notes. When he finally looked up, he said something I hadn't expected. You don't need to accuse her, not directly. We just need to lay the pieces down in order. Let the picture form itself. I liked that. It felt Clean, like building a case without pulling a trigger. I pulled out my phone and opened my saved voicemails. One from Vera played automatically. I hadn't meant for it to. Her voice filled the room, casual but sharp. Just sign the form, Zoe. You're not the face. Never were. This isn't your brand. It's mine. He hit pause. Then he looked up. That alone. That's leverage. Not scandal. Just fact. I nodded slowly. He offered to initiate a forensic audit. Quietly, efficiently. No red flags. Just a timeline, dotted with signatures and ownership inconsistencies. I agreed. By the time I left his office, the sun was beginning to dip. The air had cooled. I wrapped my cardigan tighter and walked to my car, letting the hum of nearby traffic fill the space in my mind where anxiety used to live. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't even feel angry. What I felt was movement, a momentum, slow but deliberate. Later that evening, I logged on to a workplace review forum that had started gaining traction in the beauty and wellness industry. Former employees from different companies had been posting anonymously, stories about burnout, wage theft, gaslighting from higher-ups. I scrolled through the Ashe Beauty thread. A new post had gone up less than an hour ago. I once worked 18-hour shifts without a single approved overtime hour. She used to call us aesthetic tools, said we were part of the packaging, like ribbon on a gift box. I didn't even have to ask who she was. I hesitated, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Then I typed, I believe you. That was all. It wasn't my place to hijack their voice, but it was my place to validate it. And I wasn't alone anymore. The next day, around mid-afternoon, I got a message from a friend I hadn't heard from in a while. Sandra, a freelance graphic designer who used to work with Vera before their relationship soured. She texted me a link to a podcast episode. No explanation. I clicked. The voice was familiar almost immediately. Marla. She'd worked in product distribution before being let go when she was 5 months pregnant. Her tone was calm, but the pain lived in every pause. I remember crying in the break room. One person brought me tissues. That was it. No one else noticed. Not even HR. I remembered that day. I had brought the tissues. We'd sat in silence, me next to the mini-fridge, her trying to hold it together. I never forgot the way she wiped her face with the back of her hand and whispered, "This place eats people." I closed the podcast app and opened a new browser tab. A burner email. Clean. Untraceable. I wrote, "Would you tell your story again if someone actually listened this time?" I didn't use my name. I didn't sign it, just hit send, and waited. Hours passed. I folded laundry. I roasted vegetables. I watched a rerun of a baking show where the contestant cried over a sunken soufflé. Then, just after midnight, my inbox pinged. One reply. I've been waiting for this moment for years. The truth didn't need to be shouted. It just needed to be said once, to the right person, at the right time. And now that I'd hit send, there was no pulling it back. The email sat in my sent folder like a lit match left on dry paper. To Isabeau Vance, someone I hadn't spoken to in a decade, but whose bylines I still followed when they made it past corporate filters. She knew how to peel back the varnish, how to make a whisper sound like thunder without ever raising her voice. A light breeze moved through my apartment window, stirring the corner of the page I'd scribbled on earlier. No one is coming to rescue you, but that doesn't mean you don't deserve saving. My own handwriting stared back at me like a witness. No more waiting to be chosen. No more walking on eggshells. It was time. The next morning, my phone rang while I was folding laundry. I paused mid-towel. Caller ID. Mom. I should have let it go to voicemail, but I didn't. Zoe, she said before I could even say hello. Her voice clipped like she'd been holding her breath too long. I saw something online, about Vera. I kept my voice steady. Yeah? Did you start it? She snapped. No, I told the truth. There was a long pause on the line. Then, you need to stop this. You'll ruin everything Vera built. It landed like a slap. No, worse, like a confirmation. Mom, I said slowly, do you even want to know what she did? What she said about me, about other people? How she treated everyone like props in her pageant? You've always been the sensitive one, she cut in. You exaggerate. You take everything so personally. I swallowed back the bitterness. She erased me, Mom. From the company, the funeral, the photo frames in your house. She pretends I don't exist. Don't be dramatic. That did it. The way she said it. Like I was still 12, crying in the kitchen because Vera had taken credit for the cake. I stayed up all night baking for Dad's birthday. Like I hadn't grown, hadn't built, hadn't bled. I'm not being dramatic, I said quietly. I'm being exact. She didn't reply. I hung up before she could. After the call, I needed air. I threw on a sweater, grabbed my purse, and headed out. My hands were still tense on the steering wheel when I parked in front of a small coffee shop tucked between a bookstore and a dry cleaner. It was one of those places that hadn't changed its wallpaper since the 80s, a safe space in its own way. Rowan was already there, sitting near the back with her cup half full, looking up just as I walked in. Her hug was real. No small talk. No performative smiles. Just warmth. We settled in. I followed the whole thing, she said after a sip. I couldn't believe it. Actually, that's not true. I could. I nodded. Yeah, same. She leaned in. You always stood back. I thought it was humility. Now I see. They shoved you back. That cracked something in me. Not from sadness, from recognition. You know, I said, I used to think being the quiet one meant I was noble. But really, I was just scared to take up space. Rowan smiled, but not in a pitiful way. I'm glad you stopped waiting. We sat there for another hour, talking. Not just about Vera, about college, about dreams deferred, about jobs that took more than they gave. I hadn't realized how much I missed being seen by someone who remembered who I used to be before the world started chipping pieces away. That night, back in my apartment, I turned off all the lights except the one on my desk. I pulled out my notebook, not my laptop, and started writing longhand. The letter wasn't for Vera. It was for me. A reminder. A map. Because I knew the days ahead would get messier. People would say I was bitter, that I was jealous, that I was trying to destroy a successful woman out of spite. But I wasn't out to destroy. I was out to uncover. I wrote until my hand cramped. Then I folded the letter and slipped it into the new file I'd created. Tomorrow the news cycle would begin. Tomorrow I'd lose more people. Maybe even Mom for good. But tonight, I reclaimed myself. I didn't need to scream. I just needed to speak clearly, and know I wasn't the only one saying it anymore. The message from Isabeau came just after 8 a.m. the next morning. The subject line was simple. Let's begin. Her body text was even shorter. Come in by 10. We'll verify it all. I skipped breakfast. I couldn't have eaten if I tried. The nerves didn't feel like panic anymore. They were sharper than that. Precise. Almost surgical. I printed out the last set of emails, slipped the thumb drive into my coat pocket, and headed downtown. Charlotte traffic hadn't changed. Rush hour dragging like always. But I wasn't in the same rush anymore. I wasn't headed to someone else's office, doing damage control or ghostwriting for a woman who barely acknowledged I had fingerprints, much less a name. Isabeau's studio was on the second floor of an old textile building, the kind with creaky hardwood and original brick that journalists love to call gritty. But she'd modernized it well. Exposed pipes, matte black finishes, soundproofing everywhere. She met me at the door in jeans and a gray sweater, her short hair tucked behind one ear. I remember you, she said without preamble, offering me a coffee. You were always the one in the background. It's time that ends. We sat down at a long, scarred table while her assistant set up a screen. I walked her through the receipts, the emails, the draft documents that Vera had copied and signed as her own, the voice clips, the now infamous voicemail. Just sign the form, Zoe. You're not the face. Never were. Isabeau didn't say much. She didn't need to. She listened like a surgeon before the first incision, with intent, with care, with calm. By noon, the article went live. The title was simple, almost unassuming: "The Woman Behind the Brand Who Was Erased." But the effect? Immediate. My name began to appear on screens I hadn't touched. Comments flowed in. Strangers reposted quotes from the article. People began tagging me in artwork: sketches of quiet women holding microphones, digital drawings of silhouetted figures stepping out from behind shadows. Hashtags took shape. Surt erased voice. Zoe Creed story. Credit where due. I stayed off my phone for a few hours. I needed distance. I folded laundry, rearranged the spice rack, took out the trash. It felt ridiculous, doing something so ordinary while the internet, the press, and my family were undoubtedly combusting. But there was power in it too. Power in not being pulled into a panic I didn't create. Around 4, my inbox pinged. The subject read, "Thank you." It came from an address I didn't recognize. I clicked. It was Marla. She had once worked in the warehouse of Ashe Beauty. She was quiet, efficient, overlooked, until she got pregnant and asked for medical accommodation. Vera had let her go within the week, said she was a logistical burden. I found her crying in the back parking lot, holding a cardboard box with her name misspelled on it. Now she was writing to me. "If you hadn't spoken up, I'd still believe people like us don't matter," her email said. "Please don't stop now, even if they try to silence you again." I stared at her words for a long time. The apartment was quiet. Outside, the wind knocked a branch against the glass. I could hear the soft hum of a neighbor's TV through the wall. Then I turned mine on. Vera was on a morning show. She looked polished, barely, but her eyes were puffy and her voice had a careful quiver. "It's unfortunate," she told the anchor, "that some people need to twist facts in order to feel seen. I've always tried to support women, especially those close to me. I'm heartbroken by the accusations, but I'll rise above it. That's what strong women do." I didn't throw anything. I didn't scream at the screen. I just muted the TV, because I didn't need to hear another excuse wrapped in PR gloss. I opened my phone, scrolled to her name, and deleted it, just like that. There wasn't even a tremor in my hand. Afterward, I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and created a new folder. Not just for evidence, for everything. New logo ideas, journal entries, business plans, names of women I'd met through all of this, names of people who had stories like mine. Not ready to speak, but ready to be seen. The world wasn't safe yet, but it was listening, and for now, that was enough. I didn't need to scream, I just needed to speak clearly. And no, I wasn't the only one saying it anymore. The next morning, the world responded like gasoline meeting a lit match. I was still in my robe, scrolling through headlines on my phone, when I saw the clip. Someone, probably an employee with just enough rage and just enough courage, had leaked it. A video from an internal Ashe Beauty meeting, grainy but clear. Vera stood at the head of a sleek boardroom table, arms crossed, eyes sharp. And then she said it. Without me, she'd be folding towels in a salon. The room was dead silent after the words landed. One of the men in the back looked down. Another woman blinked twice, visibly stiffening. It didn't matter how she meant it. The tone was there. The arrogance. The belief that anyone not bearing her name should be grateful to orbit her son. Within hours, it was everywhere. Headlines spun it as CEO's backstage remarks raise eyebrows. Social media tore it open like a bag of chips. Towel Girl trended. But so did Sadar Zoe Creed. People remembered the article, the voice, the receipts. And for the first time, the empire cracked where it had once gleamed. That afternoon, while sipping reheated coffee in my apartment, I received a calendar invite. Not from work, not from Isabeau. It was a family Zoom call. The title? Private. Resolve family issue. I knew what that meant. I changed into something decent, fixed my hair, and joined the meeting a few minutes late. Not intentionally. I just didn't rush anymore. Not for them. My mother was already mid-sentence. Doesn't have to go any further if we can handle this as a family. My uncle, Harold, nodded along. Their lawyer, Mr. Tolland, sat uncomfortably stiff in his seat. And Vera? She wasn't there. Of course she wasn't. You've made your point, Zoe, Mom said, calm but laced with condescension. Now let's put this to bed. I stared at the screen. Put what to bed exactly? The drama, the internet stuff, she said. We can smooth this over if you take it down. You mean the truth? I asked. There was a pause. Uncle Harold cleared his throat. Zoe, think of the family name. I leaned in. What about my name? My reputation? You think I've enjoyed being the invisible one while Vera was out front, acting like she built the whole thing on her own? Mom sighed, weary. You know we didn't mean to hurt you. No, I said. You meant to hide me. That's worse. They all fell quiet. Not one of them argued with that. I logged off before they could pretend to cry or pray or talk about forgiveness. Later that evening, I joined Marla in Isabeau's small recording studio. Nothing fancy, just a mic, 2 chairs, and a pot of herbal tea that had gone cold. We sat, raw and unedited, telling the story the way it really was. Marla talked about being pushed out of her role after getting pregnant. I shared how I was written out before I was even written in. No production team, no voice modulation, just 2 women remembering things exactly as they happened. The podcast went live that night, and by midnight, it was everywhere. Not because of scandal, but because it rang true. Unvarnished, steady. The comments flooded in. Finally, someone told my story. My sister did the same thing. This isn't rare. This is every Thanksgiving dinner. I didn't cry. I didn't cheer. I just sat still, breathing deeply, feeling a strange calm settle over me. Like standing on solid ground after years of being told I was imagining the quake. At 12:07 a.m., I received one message that stuck. Just a single line from someone anonymous. For the first time, I feel like someone told my story, word for word. And that's when I knew. I thought I was breaking a silence, but what I'd done was start a language others had been waiting to speak. I didn't disappear. I just stopped waiting to be seen by people who never looked for me. That realization settled into my chest like a final puzzle piece, not loud or dramatic, just right. I spent the early morning reading messages from strangers, women who'd worked in the shadows, sisters who'd stood beside spotlights that were never meant to shine on them, daughters who'd been good, quiet, useful, and forgotten. But the one that hit hardest came just before noon. It was a public post from Marla. Her words weren't polished. They weren't media-trained or softened. They were raw. I was 5 months pregnant when I got laid off from Ashe Beauty. They told me it was budget cuts. I found out later my position was backfilled 2 weeks later by someone younger, single, and willing to work weekends unpaid. No one cared. No one asked why I never came back. No one. Except Zoe Creed. She didn't know me, but she brought me lunch and asked if I was okay. I never forgot that. I still have the sticky note she left on the Tupperware. You deserve better. Don't let this be the end. Today, I just want to say, I see you, Zoe, and I'm proud of you. I read it 3 times, then set my phone down. And cried. Not the tears of someone who's broken, but the kind that come from seeing, finally, a mirror you didn't know you needed. A quiet truth reflected back. By 3 p.m., people began posting their own stories under the hashtag #WeSeeZoe. It wasn't about me, really. I knew that. It was about everyone who'd been left out of the photo, the credits, the boardroom, the thank you speech. I paced for a bit, tried to answer a few messages. Then I stopped. It was time. I didn't have a script. I didn't write a press release. I didn't call Isabeau. I just opened my laptop, adjusted the angle of the desk lamp, and hit go live. I stared at the screen for a second. The red dot blinked. People were joining, dozens, then hundreds. I took a breath, And then I read a poem I'd written that morning on the back of a grocery list. This is how I disappear, quietly, on my own terms. Not faded, not forgotten, just free. There was no dramatic pause, no music, just me. And the truth. I didn't look at the comments. I didn't need to. I closed the notebook, smiled softly, and looked into the camera. To anyone who's ever been edited out, I said, you were always part of the picture. They just cropped the wrong person. Then I clicked end stream. The stillness afterward wasn't empty. It was full. Like the hush that follows a thunderstorm. I sat on the couch, let the silence settle around me. The sky outside was turning the color of steel just before dusk. I made tea. No one called. No one had to. About an hour later, my phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen on the screen in a long time. Vera. I stared at it. I could have let it go to voicemail. Maybe I should have. But I answered. She didn't say hello. Just breathed for a moment. If you have anything left in you, she said, her voice low, dry, do it for Mom. Don't let this bury me. I didn't respond. She added, please, just don't make me disappear. I didn't tell her that she already had, that she'd disappeared herself from the parts of our lives that mattered. I didn't tell her I forgave her, because I hadn't. I didn't hang up either. I just listened to the quiet that followed. And then, finally, I said, I didn't do this to you. You did this by pretending I wasn't there. Click. Afterward, I poured my tea, sat by the window, and watched the sky fade into night. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I needed to prove I belonged anywhere. I knew it. After everything, the quiet wasn't empty. It was earned. A month had passed since the livestream, since Vera's last call, since the world finally saw what I'd lived under for most of my adult life. In that time, no miracles came, but small things shifted, and those shifts made room for something better than applause: peace. Ashe Beauty released a corporate statement filled with the usual legal safe phrases. We are committed to listening, learning, and improving. Vera was no longer listed on the executive page. No formal charges were filed, but the board appointed a transitional ethics team. Whatever that means. The headlines moved on, but the ripples stayed. She recorded a video in her kitchen, poorly lit, sounding just rehearsed enough to feel insincere. I'm sorry for anyone who felt excluded. I never meant to cause harm. It was the kind of apology that isn't for the person hurt. It's for the one giving it, so they can sleep easier. I didn't watch it twice. Instead, I poured energy into something else. Voice for the Voiceless wasn't a non-profit when I joined. It was a room in the back of a community center downtown. Just a few folding chairs, a donated coffee machine, and people with stories they weren't sure anyone wanted to hear. I didn't lead. I listened. Some of the women had been forced out of jobs after maternity leave. Others had been pushed into early retirement because they asked too many questions. Some simply existed quietly in the background, while louder names took credit. There was one teenage girl named Marisol, 17, sharp, skeptical, always sitting by the exit like she didn't know if she'd stay. One evening, she approached me after a meeting. My mom said you're why she finally left my dad, she said. She doesn't say thank you to anyone, but she keeps your video saved on her phone. I swallowed hard and just nodded. There's a kind of praise you don't know how to accept, so you carry it gently, like it belongs to someone else too. Back home, on a rainy Thursday, I cleaned out an old filing box. Inside was a letter I wrote when I was 19, folded 3 times, still sharp at the corners, addressed to Vera. Never sent. It was a messy apology, full of explanations, admissions, and desperation to be understood. I read the first few lines. I forgive you, even though you won't say sorry, not for you, for me. I smiled. Then I tore it in half. Not out of anger, not anymore, but because I didn't need it. That girl was writing to someone who didn't exist, hoping for closure from a door that was never going to open. Later that week, I attended a small panel on ethical entrepreneurship, not as a speaker, just an invited guest. I wore jeans and a navy blazer, nothing remarkable. During the break, a woman approached me, mid-40s, confident. She wore her hair in a tight bun and carried herself like someone used to getting answers. "I used to work under Vera," she said. "She talked about you a lot." My brows lifted. "She said you were dangerous," the woman added with a small smile. "Because you remembered everything." I couldn't help it. I laughed. "Good," I told her. "Because I do." That night, I walked home instead of taking a cab. The air was cool, the streets damp from an earlier drizzle. I passed a bakery that had just closed up, the scent of cinnamon still lingering. For a moment, I thought of the cookies at Dad's funeral, the ones I stood beside while Vera gave the speech. There was no bitterness in the memory, just distance. When I reached my apartment, I pulled out my notebook. Not to plan, not to script, just to reflect. So much of my life had been shaped around waiting. For recognition, for permission, for someone to notice I was there. But now I didn't need anyone to see me to know I existed. I'd left the room I was never welcomed into. And this time, I'll remember my own name first. Sometimes the loudest strength is the one that never raises its voice. Zoe's story reminds us that being erased doesn't mean being powerless. It means someone feared your presence enough to try. So, what would happen if more of us stopped waiting to be acknowledged and started standing in our truth? Have you ever felt like the background character in your own life? Share your story in the comments. We're listening. And if this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more real, raw family stories that deserve to be heard.